Welcome back to the Kickstart Garage. I am your host, Gavin Quigley, and I'm accompanied by my co host, Sam John Byrne. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by EY Entrepreneur of the Year finalist 2020 and CEO at Mackin Group, Andy Mackin. Andy, thanks for joining us this evening.
No problem at all. It's a pleasure to be here, Gavin and Sam.
Thank you for joining us indeed. Andy, I believe you're originally from Dundalk. You've been in Cork since 1985. Before the inception of Mackin Group, you qualified as an electrician, I believe, from the research that I've done online. Is this where your passion for like health and safety was born?
Probably not born, but definitely probably the spark was probably ignited in it in terms of obviously when you're working with electrical power and stuff like that, there's an element of risk always. So we were probably taught from a very early age in terms of our apprenticeship training to respect the danger in that respect. And then obviously later on in my career in the Navy, I got an opportunity to serve on the National Committee with PD4, which is the Permanent Defence Forces Other Ranks Representative Association, really representing enlisted personnel. And I was the Assistant Health and Safety Officer on the National Executive. And you would have guys, giving you buzz every now and then, looking for some advice in terms of a bit of work being done in the barracks or a bit of work being done on part of the naval base. And so, look, there's barriers up, do we need signage? And I had no particular qualification to be given the advice, but I would go off and research it and then give it back to them the best way I see fit. And I kind of said after a couple of months, I said to the General Secretary, I said, if I want to be given kind of advice or giving information to the guys, it'd be nice to have some kind of qualification. So, yeah, I went off and did a bit of research, and I suppose that's where the education into the health safety started then.
I also understand you're a big fan of Darren Hardy. I've heard you mention his book a couple of times on other podcasts, and I've actually only finished reading it myself. It's the Compound Effect, and it's a great book, and it's very motivational. And with that said, what motivates you to get up in the morning, and how can others find similar motivation?
But to take the cheesy answer, I would say now to be part of be the exception rule now, to quote Darren Hardy. No, generally, like what motivates me is getting up, doing a good day's work, being true to the values that we have in the company in terms of looking after our clients, candidates, and personnel, and really giving a good service. And at the end of the day, when I reach the pearly gates, it's a case of I don't want anybody saying he was a bit of a naff guy. I'd like for people to think that he was a nice guy. He'd give back. He always give his time to everybody. And to me, that'd be the perfect ending.
Give, 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 as Gary Vee would always say as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think if you give, it always tends to come back, and it comes back in spades as compared to what you give. People genuinely do appreciate the time you give them. I'm sure you guys appreciate the time I give you for the podcast. I'm sure there's guys that reach out to me on LinkedIn and I jump in a Zoom for 15 or 20 minutes and answer a few questions for them. Like, it's no big deal to me, but there's a sense of a little bit of self gratification as well, in that you're actually helping somebody. But the impact you're having on the people that are asking or reaching out is huge, and you probably don't realize at the time. Yeah, so yeah, I would always be that kind of giver's gain. That's the way it is.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. You spent 21 years in the Irish Navy. What skills or principles did you pick up from your time there that you felt really benefited you as an entrepreneur?
Well, I think, Sam, I probably said over a number of the different podcasts that I've done over the last while. Probably didn't realize how many traits I actually carried over into business until I actually was running the business. Probably the biggest one would have been discipline, just in terms of seeing something out, having the resilience to like hit a few bumps in the road but not give up and just carry on and deliver whatever project you had to deliver, get it done on time. But the discipline to see it through, just don't give up, no matter how long it takes you, get the job done, and then you move on. And that's been critical, definitely in the last 5 or 6 years, since I kind of found the likes of Darren Hardy and Les Brown and a few other kind of guys that I would look up towards in terms of motivation or personal development. The discipline element kind of just rings as a constant narrative right across all these guys. If you're disciplined, you're going to be ahead of the posse in most cases.
That's the one principle that really kind of transcends all fields, isn't it? And consistency. And I know James, I've actually just started reading Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he often preaches that. I think it's more so habits over goals. Is what I'm kind of starting to see. I'm going to stick my investor's hat on here for a moment because I'm interested in understanding what makes your company tick. So usually when I'm researching companies, I'm usually looking for value drivers. So for example, Take-Two Interactive is a company I started researching recently. They're the parent company of Rockstar Games, the creator of the popular video game franchise Grand Theft Auto. I'd consider their employees as a key value driver, considering the creativity that goes behind the games and how much manpower is actually behind that. So I look at how much capital expenditure is per employee versus and the revenue that they bring in, and then I compare it to similar people within the same industry. And each company has different value drivers. They're so for they're like the one or two things that are absolutely critical for growth and sustainability. In the context of both Mackin Talent and Mackin Consultancy, what would you consider your value drivers to be?
I suppose for us, the key value drivers for us is around service and quality of service. Because like as a consultant or in either respect, in talent or EHS, you can only charge for your knowledge, experience, and time. Like we're not producing a product per se, like we're producing a document or a policy procedure or a training document or an actual training course or designing. So you're being judged on your service that you provide. So that would be a big quality driver for us. Um, the next one then within the company in terms of values would be the people themselves, that the right people are delivering the right service to the right client. And because you know yourself in life, not everybody doesn't match up to everybody. So we would be very particularly in terms of like, getting the right consultant to go in with a particular client so that we know the client will get the best out of the consultant, but the consultant will get the best out of the relationship, which then generates the potential for more business go down the line. So there would be two kind of key ones that we would look at definitely.
It's interesting. You've achieved considerable growth, and I'm going to quote a few numbers here. I don't know how up to date they are. From listening to you on other podcasts, you're going strong with 150 employees or so around that.
Yeah, we're about 165 now.
And I think last time I heard it was 16 million in turnover. Would I be correct in saying that, or?
Yeah, I think it was $17.1 million. I would that would be about 16 million euros. We're on course, I think, for about 21.5 to $22 million this year.
Fantastic, fair play, and that's just under 6 years you've achieved that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the bulk of the growth we've had definitely would have been on the talent side, which we kind of kicked off December 30th, I think, 2014. So, yeah, just coming up in 6 years.
That's great growth in such a short space of time without overextending. And typically, on new companies, when they're trying to achieve fast growth, they typically might overextend via leverage or whatever, in order to fuel that growth. How did you manage to achieve that without overextending?
That's $1 million question, Sam. I don't. I actually genuinely like. I could give you a big highfalutin answer saying, yeah, we did A, B, and C, and then multiplied it by X, Y, and we got Z. But like we didn't really. It was about building the relationships over time, producing a top quality service, making the client want to come back for more. And the more love you give, the more love you tends to come back. Like we grew organically. We've no debt in the company. Um, and I think from 2015 we more or less doubled every year in terms of growth. So I think it's like anything else. If you produce a good service, people talk, and the word of mouth referral is as best as a referral you get compared to anything else that's out there. And then when we're dealing with some of the clients that we're dealing with, which are like some of the top tech companies around the world, the projects tend to be on a larger scale then. So you're not like just placing one person or two people. You could potentially be placing a team of 8, 10, 12 people. And that adds to the numbers then very substantially, very quickly. And then again, if you deliver on those scale of jobs, they tell other managers that have slightly bigger scales, and then before you know it, you're delivering teams of maybe 15 or 16 people. So again, the numbers go up, equivalent to the size of the project. So like a typical project for one of the big guys, you'd be going from 8 to 10 people. You could potentially be looking at kind of 1.6, 1.8 million on that SOW on its own, and we potentially could be adding probably four or five of those in a year, on a good year. On a worst case, on a bad year, like probably maybe 2 or 3. So that's still kind of adding the guts of 5.5 million to your turnover. So one of those kind of big projects can be a huge differentiator on your scale.
Yeah, just to stay on the business development side of things and scaling, like consulting in general is a giant industry. I read recently it's a total value of around $250 billion. The global consulting sector, one of the largest, most mature markets within the professional services industry. So when it comes to like the growth plan, the strategy, gathering clientele, Like, how do you go about competing with the likes of McKinsey, BCG, Bain, and those giant companies?
We don't compete, Kevin. We just do our own thing. Because I think if you get into a game of competing with companies, you end up beating yourself, because you want to be as big. Like for me, as a CEO, and for the leadership team that we have across Mackin EHS and Mackin Talent, our number one goal every year is to be better than we were last year. If that's $500 or €500, we're better than we were last year. Is it what we want? Probably not, but we're better. So it goes back to what you were saying earlier on, Sam. Consistency. It's just keep putting the foot forward. If it's only a half a foot, it doesn't matter. You've still gone forward. If you keep making those half feet, like 6 months down the road, you made a lot of progress. Then you might not have, if you're competing against the big guys and getting hung up and caught up on what they're doing. But a lot of our, like I said earlier, like a lot of the growth that we'd have would be organic growth that we would kind of develop. Like we probably have three main strands that we look at. So we look at just developing out our existing market. So we look for opportunities within our client base as it is, as to where potentially we could have other opportunities to grow more business. Then we look at the new markets, and so potentially new areas, new states in America, new regions. Like we just opened an office in Cape Town recently, and Singapore earlier on, because there was opportunities there to again look after one of those global clients, but they were looking at expanding in an area, and we were able to help them because we had the foresight of mind to say, look, we can actually get boots on the ground there for you if that's something you'd like, and we solve the problem for them. And a lot of the time, that's what you're doing. And then the third one then would be the acquisition trail. So it is a kind of a key focus for us. Our revenue goals are like to be at 75 million for 2025 and 150 million by 2030. So acquisition will have to form a part of that, obviously, to kind of spearhead good solid quick growth on top of the organic growth that you'll have anyway. So we're in early stages of looking at two potential acquisitions at the moment in the US. And we've got word today, actually, you get the scoop now, guys, that there's potentially one for Ireland as well. And whether it'll all come off at the same time, I don't know. But we have potential funding in place if we need to execute any of those. But one of them will add potentially 15 million to our turnover. Another one is 7 million. Another one is 4.5. So you're looking at over 20 odd million there on top of where we're going. So that gets us to nearly 40 million revenue by the end of 2022 or 2023. So we're not too far off our goal then for 2025. Just knuckle down and move on. They'd be the three kind of main areas, Gavin, we concentrate on.
Yeah, I mean that's something I think a lot of people in Ireland would have picked up on, especially with yourself, Andy. Just being able to scale globally is something that a lot of companies would struggle with, but it seems that you've got a bit of a knack for it, which is great to see. And it goes back to what you answered the question with, I suppose, just not comparing yourself with those big competitors. I think it goes back to a quote where it's like, losers focus on winners, winners focus on winning. A little bit cliche, but I thought it was appropriate there.
No, but it's true though. I agree. I 100% agree with you. I think you can get caught up in, and even if you bring it back a bit, even like those guys, you come down to the Robert Halfs, the Allegiance, the Pro Unlimiteds, and they are still big companies turning over just shy of $1 billion or over $1 billion, or even Kelly Services, like in the 6, 7, 800 million. Like we're not in that league yet, and I say yet because we will strive to get there. But I'm certainly not going to be comparing us to them to get there, because, as you said, you get lost in all the noise that's out there, and you end up not concentrating on your own progress, and you start concentrating on what everybody else is doing. So then ultimately your eye is going to be ticking off the ball, so you're not going to have the growth that you want.
And to go a little bit more granular on that, I suppose we're talking about things like scale. The actual clients that you're dealing with, and I'll focus specifically on Mackin EHS. What are some of the common training needs that your clients would come to you with, and in terms of like driving results and to leave them happy and wanting to come back and renew contracts and things like that? What exactly have you been able to achieve for some of them to date?
Well, there's a combination of things. I mean, training is a very, very wide and broad area. There's probably a couple of elements to it. The first one would be the regulatory requirements. So certain businesses will have regulatory requirements to complete training. So in the construction industry, you'll have guys that will have to have all the tickets for the machinery that they drive. If they're working at height, they'll have to have their mobile elevator platform working at height tickets for just tower training, that kind of stuff. They're all regulated and ticketed and required. So there's a kind of there's nearly a kind of they have to do it. So sometimes it's not a case of they want to do it; they have to do it, and we can provide it for them. And then you have the other clients then that have particular products or services that they do that they want to design a bespoke training around to get a particular safety message across. They're the ones that we really like because you're getting into the juicy stuff there in terms of mapping it out, designing it, and then actually delivering it. And whilst it might not be a regulatory requirement for the client to do that, it's something that they need to do to make sure that the people that are building the product are doing it safely. So there is probably a lot more love in those ones because when you produce a really good training around those elements, that's that warm, fuzzy feeling you get then when the client says, that's a great job, that's really, really appreciate that. The feedback was fantastic. So that's the driver on the training for us. But yeah, it goes right across the board. I mean, in terms of value, ultimately you want to make sure that the client is happy at the end of the day. That's the ultimate driver. Well, and even it doesn't really matter whether it's regulatory training or not. Ultimately, no matter what training you give, the feedback that you get from the guys that take the training, the feedback that you get from the client is key. And we will always say to them, on all our instructors are nearly programmed to a T now with this, is they will ask for negative as well as positive feedback, because positive feedback is fine. You can't really make any iterations or changes on training if everything's fine. So ultimately, somebody isn't happy about something, and we like to hear that because that's the only way we can improve as a company to give a better quality training and a better quality service to the client. So I would nearly appreciate the negative feedback more than the positive feedback sometimes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like Bill Gates said, was a success is a terrible teacher. You always need to be learning from your mistakes.
Absolutely, yeah. Making mistakes. Yeah, look, if you don't make mistakes, you'll never learn anything, I think, because ultimately, if you look over your life, no matter what you do, Sam, whether it be personal development, work, just your personal life, any mistakes you've made, you bloody learn from them. And you tend not to make the same mistakes twice. And if you do, you need to take a look at yourself.
Yeah, my uncle used to always say, you can make you're allowed to make mistakes, but not the same mistake twice.
Exactly.
There's a story I heard, but just speaking about Bill Gates a while back at a dinner party with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, where they were asked, what factor do you feel is the most important in getting to where you've gotten in your life? To which they both replied, focus. And sometimes you see companies diverting from their mission statement into other fields, products, or industries because they look attractive. But they end up falling behind because they pull the resources from their already profitable businesses. Um, you've managed to divert into a completely separate field successfully with Mackin Talent. How did you manage to achieve this without compromising the results of your already existing business?
Good question. I think there's a twofold answer to that. So the first part of that was it was kind of like a seamless transition in one way. We were working for a client in Dublin that had obviously a huge operation in the States, and I was working on a across the pond project, and I noticed that these guys a lot of the time were contractors, and they do a certain amount of time and they potentially would move off and move on. And I built up a bit of a relationship with one of the directors of the program, and I said, look, it'd probably be a good idea, like if you could actually just look at getting a solid base of people to deliver a project over a longer period of time, that you won't have as much kind of downtime on the project, and it will probably deliver it a lot easier and a lot quicker. And he said, like, what do you suggest? And I said, well, look, I said, potentially, I said, you could look at project resourcing. And he goes, would you be interested in doing that? I mean, obviously, like the company that they're with at the moment, I'm not too happy with them anyway, and the guys are not too happy with them. No, it wasn't something I wasn't trying to sell myself for the job, but I did see the opportunity, and I took some time to think about it, and I said, yeah, actually, I said, maybe we'll do that. And we did. We ended up managing two guys, and I basically thought I was doing a favor for this particular guy. But of course, he talked to somebody else. He was very happy with the service, and like we became a project resourcing business nearly overnight. Ended up probably managing 3 or 4 people for about a year and a half, until I had an opportunity with a different company to actually go and source a particular EHS consultant for them that they wanted on a kind of a full-time contract basis. And then he talked to somebody else. So then it kind of transitioned from a project resourcing into when people started looking for non-EHS people, they were just looking for lab technicians or data analysts. And it came back to the service, not so much that we couldn't deliver what we were looking for. But that's how the kind of talent element evolved. So it kind of went from maybe an EHS project resourcing, and then transitioned from that into the talent. And in lots of ways, there's a lot of crossover between EHS. Like, people wouldn't normally think about it, but we would nearly consider ourselves workplace specialists, because like when you have the linkage between talent and EHS, there's a lot of crossover in terms of how that actual person sits within the company that they're working for, how they're looked after, how they're maintained, how they're brought in, how they're exited, and then how they're looked after in between. Like from an ergonomics point of view, just from an office safety point of view, you're always looking at the individual in that way. But that's a slightly elongated answer for you. Like, but it kind of went EHS, that walked away in itself. We transitioned into kind of project resourcing side by side, the EHS, and then transition into talent, and then the two of them kind of just ran side by side.
Yeah, you take a very, I'm not even going to say methodical, but like almost a one step at a time approach. It seems to be with any kind of decisions you make. So it's not that you're diving into anything, you know. But
No, I mean, like, I think sorry to cut across you. I think you have to kind of look at things objectively, and like, and not be fearful of taking a chance either. Like, I mean, obviously we were still taking a chance because we were going into an area that we weren't familiar with. But like, managing 2 or 3 people, I kind of thought, look, how hard can it be? It's only 2 or 3 people, and then six years on, like, we've got 165 people globally, and you're kind of going, holy crap, what happened here?
so currently you're both the CEO and managing director of Mackin Consultancy. I'd be correct in saying that, yep?
Yeah, nearly everybody just kind of calls me the CEO, and I think the managing director was in there on my LinkedIn profile, just sitting there. But yeah, I go by loads of names, but yeah, I'm not too hung up on titles really, though.
Could you give us a bit of insight into your day-to-day with the roles that you play with the 2 companies, and how do you manage your time managing the 2 companies?
Like, a typical day would be, I get up anywhere between 5 and 5:30. I meditate for 15-20 minutes. I read then for half an hour, usually something motivational, inspirational, or for personal development. I go for a run, then I go training. So I probably do 5K. My 2 boys have kind of got me into doing a few little bits and pieces on the weights now, more for tone than anything else. Come back, have the breakfast, and then I'd start off with meetings then with Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Singapore. Get into the office then maybe for around 10. Then I'd be just working on the EHS stuff that kind of tends to come early in the morning. So just kind of outline whatever projects are there, running through what needs to be done, what needs to be delivered, making sure the guys have what they need to get on with the work. And then I check in with the talent side. I have my CEO, Fiona Donnelly, that kind of really is the main driver behind Mackin Talent. So we probably meet 2 or 3 times a day just for updates and bits and pieces on how things are going. She tends to be fair to her not to disturb me if she doesn't have to. But we would sync in on a minimum at least once on a daily basis, but it's usually kind of 2 or 3 times. Then evening, probably back around kind of 6:15, have the bit of grub, and then I go on to the US and just make sure things are going okay there. Again, we've another CEO over there looking after operations, but again, it's just sinking in to make sure everybody has what they need and there's no blockages or challenges to anybody's day. Try and make it as smooth as possible, and probably sign off around kind of 9:30, 10 o'clock, and I might just play around the laptop for an hour with myself. That could be just research, whatever. Definitely in bed by 11:30, no later. So I try and get that 5.5, 6 hours sleep. I'm usually good at that.
Keeping that discipline and consistency anyway.
Yeah, it's not easy, Sam. And I had to, like, once I took an element of the discipline from the Navy, you have to rigorously kind of practice it, just kind of train the brain muscle to react the way it does. But it pays off. It definitely pays off. I definitely seen the increase in productivity over the last 2 or 3 years by knuckling down and that kind of stuff. And it's tweaking it every day. Sort of.
Do you find that you're trying to get more flexible with your schedule on a week by week basis?
In terms of not doing as much, or
for instance, like, are you giving weight more to other tasks, like even family life or anything like that? Like, would you be spending, say, 1 week more time with the family, more time at work?
No, I mean, I tend to, like, the weekends are family time generally. Like, so we don't really do. I mean, I've often, if I get up early and the missus isn't up, I might sneak onto the laptop for an hour or 2. But that's usually at the weekends. I'm looking at researching other projects or researching items that we might be looking for a particular market or an area that we're going into. But once Marion gets up, we head off. We do a kind of a 5K walk in the Blarney Castle here. We're very lucky. It's only like 9 minutes down the road. So we got our year passes for COVID, and we get in there every weekend and walk. And it's gorgeous. It's like just a little bit of an oasis like in the middle of a Blarney village, but like you think you were miles from anything. And then the two boys are kind of older now, and they're like kind of 23 and 19, but they're getting into golf and gym and stuff. So all the kind of stuff that I'd like to do. So they're pulling me out for a game of golf every now and then. So the weekends would be purely family. During the week, then it might be case of, when I say like 10 o'clock in the evening, it's not religiously every night, but that would be more or less the kind of time when I drop off. So it could be a case of watching a Netflix episode, or if they see something on TV that's funny that we might watch. But I tend not to watch a lot of TV, and I tend not to do a lot of social media and stuff, because it just takes away from the time you should be spending it knuckling down on the stuff that's going to get you to where you want to go.
Yeah, fair play. Just speaking on time management as well, it's I've kind of noticed since starting the podcast, and more so with actually starting the podcast, because there's just so many kind of promotional bits, editing, all those kind of non-value add kind of tasks. But when you're kind of starting out, it's hard to hand them over to somebody else, if you get me, trying to outsource it. What advice can you offer to entrepreneurs who are struggling to hand over those tasks? Like, first of all, identifying them and then handing them over. Like, how did you manage it yourself when starting?
I was that guy. I was that sailor. I was that soldier. Yeah, no, it is hard, because like you have that whole kind of syndrome that you look, it's easier just for me to do it and it'll be done, or it's like nobody's going to do it better than me, which is absolute and utter crap, by the way, because there's always somebody that can do it better than you can, and there's always somebody that will do it way quicker than you will. But I think it's the old ego in your head thinking, oh Jesus, no, it'd be just easier for me to do it. But eventually you can't. And Darren Hardy actually came up with a great one, Sam. He says, if you take your hourly rate, so if you take your salary, so he says divide it, 2,080 hours is the typical working year for hours, which is a 40-hour week, multiplied by the 52. Divide that by 60, and you get your hourly rate. And he said, if you're doing any task that's below your hourly rate, hand it off to somebody else. Because you're, number one, you're not being as valuable to your company as you should be. You're not being as productive as you should be. Just to go back to what we said at the start, they're probably able to do it quicker and probably able to do it better than you can. And definitely, like I've seen that in the company. I mean, I'm no spring chicken anymore. Like I'm in good shape for nearly 55, but I mean, the guys coming in behind me, like the 25, 26, 27, 28-year-olds, they're fresh out of college. They've probably done 3 or 4 years experience. They've seen things being done differently. And that's what I want them coming into the business for. Like, what can we change that's going to make us better? I mean, I don't want to stay doing what I did 20 years ago because I was good at doing it. If there's better ways and fast ways of doing it that we can be more productive and effective for our clients and for the organization, then that's the way to go. But it's hard. It is hard. I do understand the pull, because it took me years. We started the EHS business in 2004. I took my first employee on in 2007. Trish was an office manager, and at that time, kind of the straw that broke the camel's back was I was just looking at some of the documents that I had done the previous year, and I could see typos in them that the client probably didn't realize. But I said, that's not good for me. But I mean, I was coming in, getting up in the morning, but at that time probably 6:30, being down on site in Waterford for 8 o'clock, on site for the day, back home in the evening, start finishing off some project work that I would have been doing the night before. Marion might pop down to her mother's, and she'd have come back and gone to bed and all that when I used to be in the toil room, which was my old office as such. And I could be there till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning doing invoicing and stuff like that. So I'm kind of saying, this is ridiculous, because if you're really burning the candle at both ends then. So that was the point, and I kind of said, no, you know what now? I said, there's a case to be made here. Just look for a small office, 1 or 2 desks, get in there. At least when I close the door, if I work late and it's 9 o'clock, that's fine. At least the door's closed. I'm not touching it till the following morning. That's, of course, when we didn't have the technology where you could contact it all the time. But it was probably the single best thing I ever did, just making that jump. Granted, it was a little bit of a headache having a bill to pay every year or every month in terms of rent, but having the office and getting Trish in to even just give her, you look after the invoicing, chase the clients, any messages, just get them out for me, and then I get to them afterwards. And that probably give me back about an hour or two every day that I was missing. Really being more productive now. So instead of doing, and I don't mean this in a demeaning way, But a task that maybe is like 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 euros an hour for a person, when I'm charging myself probably at the time of probably 50 or 60 euros an hour, then it's like it's nonsensical to be doing that, like. So you have to really question yourself why you're doing it. The ego at some stage kind of has to go. You can't say no. It's more productive and more efficient for me to get somebody in to give me a hand. Okay, it's going to be a bit of a headache at the start. I've got to feed that person in terms of salary and bits and pieces. But look, over the course, it's going to be worth it. And it was probably the single best decision I made at that time. Because number one, it convinced me that I couldn't do everything. I didn't have to do everything. And I could concentrate on other stuff that was going to bring in more business for the company.
I mean, it's something that I think exists in individuals, in entrepreneurs, but also in like boards of directors and managerial teams as well. And it's that like reluctance to change and to continue to kind of do things how they've always been done, which is actually like the one thing in standing in the way of growth, usually, like you say, in terms of saving time and reducing costs and things like that. From my understanding now, in a modern consultancy firm, there's like, teams of analysts, there's consultants, all being focused on like, project-based work, all parts of the wheel, cogs in a wheel, all moving towards the same thing. But there's so much emphasis now put on like data-driven decision making in recent years, and you kind of touched on it there with bringing in young, fresh people with fresh ideas and innovating. But how does Mackin EHS keep up with this like ever-changing landscape of like consulting tools and tech and new ways of doing things?
For the EHS side of things, funny enough, Gavin, it's moved a lot slower because a lot of the EHS stuff was paper based. Now there's definitely over the last couple of years there's better software tools that are in there, and we use one or two of them ourselves in terms of platforms for hosting documentation, because there is a lot of documentation. Like you go to a company, you've got your safety statement, you've got your risk assessment, you've got your medical statements, you've got training records, you've got your legal register. So they all have to be housed somewhere. Like the old days, it was in a folder on a carousel in the middle of the floor. Everybody knew where the safety file was. But now it's like everybody's on laptops or computers, so they have to have that kind of information accessible to them. So definitely that has come. In terms of the services to be provided, I could even look at the ergonomic assessments now. Like we've done probably this year, and so we're coming up on 1,000 remote ergonomic assessments. We've done them in Singapore, Australia, Germany, Belgium, London, Ireland, for clients of ours that have people working remotely, and that is something that we innovated ourselves at the start of COVID in terms of how we're going to maintain this, because everybody knew that people were going to be working at home once the bad news had hit there at the end of April, start of May at that time, but nobody knew how and what they needed, who was going to check in on them, and the employer knew they were responsible for them, so they had to be able to contact them in some way, get the assessment done, and then they have a baseline to say, right, this person needs a new monitor, this person needs a new chair, this person needs a new desk, and so on and so forth. So we would have gone from that old kind of sitting down with the person at their workstation to doing it remotely. So it is changing slowly. We've seen it as well in one of the sites we did a project for in the States. They're using drone technology now to actually map out buildings. Eventually the drones will become small enough that they'll be actually inside the buildings, and they'll be able to take dimensions and look at stairs and exits and all that kind of stuff. So it's moving slowly, but it is definitely moving. Whether you embrace every single one of them, I don't know. I think you can get caught up as well in all the new fandangle stuff. At the end of the day, for me, and I think how I have probably generated a bit of success in Mackin EHS, as we kind of call it now, it's the practicality of it. Like, don't overcomplicate stuff. I mean, you can come down and hard on the guy and say, look, that's the legislation, that's what you have to do. But sometimes that's just not practical to work. I mean, yeah, there has to be an element of practicality around legislation, how you interpret it and how you implement it within a work environment. And software can't do that for you. That a lot of that is like looking at the problem, your gut feeling: is that safe? Is it not safe? Are we taking a risk? If we are, can we manage it? To what point? So you get algorithms probably that can say, yeah, percentage wise, we think there's a 26% chance. I much prefer to look at that and say, look, actually, guys, that's like 75%, and we have to control this. But they will get there. The technology is catching up all the time.
Yeah, I think with remote working, obviously everyone thinks it's fantastic, but well, they did initially think it's fantastic, certainly when they realized productivity wasn't affected too much. But you do neglect the human element. There's things like Zoom fatigue, and people do, when they feel like a robot, they don't feel appreciated, and it kind of leads to a lot of churn, especially in some of the tech companies that you talk about now. And it was something I wanted to ask, because you did allude to the fact that the talent side of things has been very successful in since, I suppose, the pandemic, and everyone were working remotely. Now, I do feel we're in a very different world at the moment in terms of, I suppose, employment culture is what I talk, or how I describe it, versus say like the 80s and 90s. I look at like my dad, who would have had a job for 30, 40 years. You get your pension, and folks aren't doing that anymore, really. From my understanding, you're not staying in the same company for your whole career. A lot of people will spend 5 or 6 years somewhere, and then they'll want to move on. I think people are realizing that there's a lot of potential to progress in your career by always looking at what else is on the table. So there's the churn, like I say, is absolutely mental in some of these modern tech companies. It's nuts, especially in sales, in the industry that I work in. The average like 25-year-old is just constantly looking for the next big opportunity, probably because these companies are growing so quickly as well. But you put a huge emphasis on treating clients as family, and I've seen that written in a few places about both companies that you work with. So how do you help clients find talent that are in it for the long run?
Um, I suppose a lot of the secret to our kind of success in terms of that is that potentially like two or three of the companies that we work with, myself and Denise in the US, would have worked in those companies as contractors from the EHS side of things. So we understand the culture of the company. So at least then when the initial hiring that we had in terms of getting the right people for the right team, when you understand the culture of the company, definitely you can you can really feel from somebody whether they're going to fit into the team or not. And we try to train all our recruiters as they come in once they're on board, and to do our onboarding training. And we do put an awful lot of emphasis on judging character, understanding the team that they're trying to fill the role for, understand the culture of the company. Because ultimately, I think if you have a good understanding of the company, the culture, and you know what type of candidate, because like yourself, Gavin, like 9 times out of 10, you've got 4 or 5 clients or the candidates going for position. They've all ticked the box in the requirements. They wouldn't be in front of you if they hadn't. So then it's like, okay, who's going to fit into this team? Like, do I think all of them would fit into the team? Possibly maybe 3 out of the 5. And then it's out of that 3, and culturally, which one will be successful for that team? And a lot of that time, it comes down to gut. Like we don't use a lot of software technology in terms of sieving through CVs or resumes, as they'd say in the States, because I think you get a better feel for the CV or the resume when you actually read through it yourself. You nearly get a kind of a gut feeling for the person. Then when you meet them, it'll either say, yes, your gut feeling was right, this person's not going to be suitable, oh yeah, I think he's going to be a great fit, at least to get to the next stage. So we would use, that would be the secret to our success in lots of ways. And I think longevity for us, I mean, one of our clients, I think 2 out of the first 3 employees that I took on for that client are still with that client. So that's coming up in 6 years almost, which is for as a contractor within an organization, it says a lot.
Fantastic. Yeah, there was something I saw recently, and it was like, when you apply for a job now, you don't actually, your CV, your resume, like you said, it doesn't actually see a human before it passes through like 3 different AI screeners, seeing like where you went to college or what degree you have or how much experience you have. It's absolutely crazy versus back in the day where you give someone a call, you ask for a job, and you start the next day. It's mental how things are just changing so rapidly. Something I noticed, I think it was a few months back now at this stage, but you were hiring for data engineers, data scientists, data analysts at Mackin Talent. I'm wondering what kind of a role you think data is playing in the world of recruitment, and how it's changing in recent years. You touched on it a little bit there, but specifically for you guys.
I think for what we find the biggest value in the data is the trends, to see where positions are migrating to, what's the next new thing that's coming out, I did a project actually with a company in Connecticut last year. I actually kind of did a keynote for them in terms of the future of work, and it was like they were primarily in the industrial kind of sector. But it was amazing that like nearly 62% of the roles, Gavin, had transitioned from the old type roles within industry to actually tech roles. Um, and I think there was a statistic. Now I'm probably going to shoot myself in the foot here because I don't have it to hand. But I think it was something like 25% of the roles within the industrial sector, from a technology point of view, haven't even been invented yet. But they're going to come because the transition in technology, like all you look at the oil industry 15, 20 years ago, the machines were there, they were kind of automated stop start, and they had kind of the logic controls for all the sensors along the belt. Now the machines are talking to each other. They're able to get volume. They're able to see what right down to a minuscule of where a product is on a line, or how minuscule a bolt or a screw is to the finest detail. But those machines are now, so you're like you need hardware security guys, you need software engineers, as opposed to maintenance electricians or technicians. Like a lot of those roles are transitioning into actually tech roles. And what happens is you're dealing with a lot of guys then who are in the industry for 20 or 30 years at the head of a company, and they're very, very slow to embrace it, but they spend maybe 5 million on a piece of kit, and then can't understand why the electrician or the mechanic can't look after it, because it's just completely different than it was 15 or 20 years ago. So that was interesting. But like that's the way the roles are going. Like, so I mean, I would like another 15, 20 years, I think most roles in most industries will have transformed or transcended into some form of tech, in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, an example of that I saw recently was Bobby Healy's Aero, his drone delivery, who I think they're taking on funding soon. You've probably heard of it. You touched on drone tech there. It's becoming pretty prevalent in modern business. But for the constant like checking of batteries and the kind of testing of the drones and everything, he's automated that with robots, and he's got like a line of robots. So like you say, it's just constantly checking and updating the software as opposed to having a load of technicians standing there and actually doing it. It's just an example of how it's changing. It's mental to see, but there still will be like roles for people. They're just very, very data focused now, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like even look at Camille, like they're doing their deliveries now with drone, and so like, there's a whole background technology is used there now in software, just making sure everything is working correctly, updating, making sure all the programs are correct, as opposed to the guy just checking it and said, yeah, everything's good to go. Let's get it out there. You know?
Hmm. I've one last question for you today, Andy. I believe Sam does as well, and we'll finish it up very soon. You recently said, I believe it was in either a press release or one of the recent interviews that you did, that the advice that you would offer a less experienced entrepreneur is to not neglect the importance of sales. You said you can do nothing with or in your business without generating sales. Seems simple, but it's very, very important, which I definitely agree with. In consulting, do you now put significant emphasis on scaling through like maximizing referrals and really focusing on like that flywheel of making sure every customer is really, really happy? Or do you also incorporate things like paid advertising or like marketing campaigns to acquire new business too?
I would say the bulk of ours is kind of devoted to the sales through referrals, being making sure the clients are 100% happy. We do a small bit of the pay per click into the marketing campaigns and stuff like that, but definitely the majority of the emphasis would go on sales focus from the consultants, producing the service to whatever client they're giving it to. I think there's no better referral than somebody passing on your company name or your person's name or your consultant name to a friend or a client or a vendor of theirs, because they've just been so happy with the service. That's the ultimate referral for me. That's just like they're saying everything's quality, and they want somebody else to experience that service as well.
And I think Tesla is almost a testament to that. I've seen like they're a $1 trillion company now and spend zero on advertising. Everything's word of mouth, which is incredible. It is the best form of marketing. Um, yeah, as Gavin mentioned, just one last question, and we'll let you go then, Andy. I know you don't pay attention to competition, in terms of the Mackin Group, but This is a question I haven't asked in a long time, and I typically think it's a good question for assessing the industry that you operate in. If you had one silver bullet and you could take out any one of your competitors, which one would it be and why?
You're not going to get me to name it. That would, that could start all sorts of mess. And that's, I could think of one company that I would like, and only because I just don't like the way they do business. I don't think you have to be, excuse my friends, an arsehole in business to be successful. I think you can be really successful being a nice guy. Obviously, you've got to make tough decisions, but I think generally in business, people appreciate tough decisions when you're honest and forthright with them. I think if you're just being, obnoxious or overcritical or overbearing for the sake of it because that's the way you thought it should be, um, no, it's not. I won't give you the name. That'd be very unfair. I know all's fair in love and war, but no. Ask me. I give you another question, Sam. Ask me another question. Seeing that I didn't give you the answer you wanted.
I think that was the last one on the agenda there anyway, so I'll hand it over to Gav for the conclusion anyway, but yeah, no, I understand for that one.
The- There's a specific reason why Sam has stopped asking that question because it's a bit unfair on the guest. So I think only
I think he's trying to get somebody into a lot of trouble, Gavin. Does he?
I think only one or two people have answered it, but no, we appreciate it, and it's a very good answer as well. I think you're dead right. You don't have to be a nasty person or malicious, and both like internally and client facing roles as well. I think you can be a nice guy, nice and respectful, and you can go really really far. So I think that's a kind of testament to how you've gotten so far as well, Andy. But look, it's been an absolute pleasure. We'll leave it there for today, folks. Like I said, been a absolute pleasure having you on the show. Massively appreciate your time this evening. I know you're doing fantastically well with the global domination, but I certainly am excited to see how things go with you for the rest of the decade and beyond. I think it's great. For those who do want to find out a little bit more about you, I know you're not mad into like social media and things like that, but do you want to tell the audience where they can find you if they're trying to reach out?
You get it on Mackin Consultancy, www.mackinconsultancy.com. On Twitter, I think it's just at Andy Mackin. Instagram is Mackin Andy. I'd only probably post it on the likes of those kind of social media platforms at the weekends and the evenings. So if I see something that really catches my eye, I tend not to pay too much attention to that because, again, it's just noise. It takes you away from the job. Really like that little night shiny silver things will distract you from what you need to do. Because I tend to turn the phone off. I put it on silent during the day and I physically only check once or twice during the day. Just keep that bit of discipline.
Yeah, certainly something that I tried to do as well, especially working from home, is just turn the phone off and jump into the day. Don't let it distract you. Yeah, but Andy, listen, thanks again, and to everyone listening, we will see you next week for the next episode.